Hi, my name is Karen and I'm here to read you a story. Today's story is called Amazing Patsy and it was written by Valerie B. Williams, originally published in American Gothic Short Stories by Flame Tree Press in May of 2019. Okay, here we go. Granny, they did it again, Patsy wailed. Her light blonde hair dripped with a sticky orange liquid. Fanta. Come here, child. I motioned her to the farmhouse sink and dunked her head under running water, combing her hair with my fingers. Kids were mean to me when I was your age. Your mama too, God rest her soul. Why do they hate us? Her pale blue eyes begged for an answer. At 8, she was 3 years older than I'd been when I heard the story. It was time. Past time. With a towel wrapped around her wet hair, she looked like a miniature version of her mother, Ellen. My heart ached at the memory of my daughter covering her bald head with colorful turbans, pretending that she was fine all the while wasting away. Patsy, a wise child, played along. I delayed telling her the story in the hopes of preserving just a few more years of childhood and innocence. Enough of those years had been stolen by her mother's illness and lingering death. I'd raised Patsy since she was 5 years old. We faced each other across the kitchen table, she with her mug of hot chocolate, me with a cup of coffee sweetened with a shot of Jack Daniels for courage. Honey, you know how I always tell you you're special? She smiled. All grannies say that. That well may be, and I'm guilty as charged, but you really are special, just like your mama was and like I am, all the way back to my great-granny Maud. I covered her small hand with mine. You're going to be the 6th charmer in the family. She furrowed her brow. What is that? How does it work? Charmer? Will it work on them mean Wilkins sisters? I smiled and held up both hands. Whoa, give me a chance to tell you, it doesn't work on people. I took a long swallow from my mug, inhaling the sweet smell of Jack Daniels and feeling its warmth slide down my throat. My granddaughter's reaction to the story would guide both our futures. One girl in each generation of our family is able to charm bloody cane toads. She shook her head. Miss McCarthy says bloody cane toads aren't real. Someone made them up to scare kids away from Big Cypress Swamp. Teachers aren't as smart as they think they are. Sometimes old knowledge is the best knowledge. Patsy looked skeptical. My great-granny Maud was the first charmer. She lived in the old homestead. The old homestead was right on the edge of the swamp. Nothing more than a shotgun shack, constantly open windows served as air conditioning. Screens added by my father kept bugs out, but constant heat pressed down like a soggy blanket. Great-granddaddy Ralph worked the cane fields. His boss got the bright idea to bring in a new kind of cane toad from South America. Now, you know how big regular cane toads are. Big as Daddy's hand! She put her fingers and thumbs together to outline how big she remembered his hands were. When Ellen had gotten sick, Patsy's daddy had up and disappeared. That's right, honey. I didn't discourage her talking about her daddy, but I didn't encourage it either. Well, these new toads were half again as big and meaner. Some folks say they were part piranha. The company brought them to eat the pests in the cane fields, and boy did they do the job. They ate mice, lizards, small frogs, birds, as well as the cane beetles. The new toads not only had poison in their skin, but poison glands near their mouth as well, and they had 2 rows of tiny pointed teeth like the edge of a serrated knife. Maybe they were part piranha. I laughed, and Patsy laughed with me, although it wasn't really funny. Nerves, I guess. I continued on. Eventually, the toads ran out of food and moved on. Moved on? Asked Patsy. She wore a chocolate mustache from her drink. I motioned to her and she knuckled her hand across her mouth, leaving a small smear on her left cheek. Yes, but it took a while for the company to realize that. The toads moved at night and rested during the day, so no one saw them travel. Another difference from regular cane toads, besides being bigger and having a dark red belly. You mean a bloody belly. Folks only added bloody after the first incident. Scarier. Her eyes widened, but she kept quiet. Great-Granddaddy Ralph was the first to see a knot of them. That's what a group of toads is called, a knot, I added in response to her puzzled look. It was January, so it got dark earlier. He and his partner Billy were walking out of the fields after their shift when they saw them. Ralph said it looked like an ocean of enormous toads covering the path, hopping over and on top of each other. The men froze 20 feet away. A small swamp deer leapt from the cypresses, landed in the middle of the knot, then let out a scream. Ralph said he'd never heard a deer scream like that. The toads latched onto the deer's belly and legs, pulling it down until it disappeared under a thrashing blanket of warty bodies. A noise like rubbing sandpaper filled the air as they pushed each other aside to feed. In minutes, the deer was nothing but bones, and the toads moved away from the men into the swamp. Weren't they scared? Patsy hugged herself and shivered. Of course they were. And they were lucky, too. The toads weren't interested in them. At least not that day. Was that when people started to call the toads bloody? Not yet. When Ralph and Billy reported what they'd seen, the boss didn't believe them. Said they must have had some shine in their lunch buckets. I poured myself another coffee with a generous dollop of Jack Daniels. Ralph invited Billy over for supper the next week. While Maud was cleaning up in the kitchen, the men stepped into the backyard for cigars. They heard a horrible ruckus and ran to the door, where she saw giant toads covering Billy to the waist, with more climbing him like he was a tree. A couple of them, spattered in blood, hopped off with big chunks of torn flesh in their mouths, and more climbed on. Billy screamed, "Get him off! Get him off!" while Ralph swatted at the toads with a shovel, knocking one off only to have two more latch on. Ralph's feet and ankles were covered with toads. He stood on one leg to shake them off, and the other almost fell, finally pushing himself back up with the shovel and limping towards Billy. Ma didn't know what to do. Then she knew exactly what to do, like she was following an order from God. She started singing. I broke into the song she sang that night. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Singing? Patsy scrunched her face. That wouldn't do any good. It was the best thing, the only thing she could have done. The toads fell off both men, faced Maud, and sat in front of her like well-behaved schoolchildren. Still singing, she walked slowly into the cypresses with the knot following. When she returned, singing the last line, "Then when we first begun," there wasn't a toad in sight. The child's mouth hung open. What happened to Great-Granddaddy Ralph and Billy? I shook my head. Billy died. Great-Granddaddy Ralph never worked again. The docs had to amputate his left foot to save him, and he walked with crutches the rest of his life. Did anyone try to hunt the toads? Nobody believed the story. Then the tests came back as a match for cane toad poison, and the bites were the right size for bloody cane toads, but they still didn't believe that Maud had charmed them away, said the toads must have left on their own. Patsy rested her chin on her hands. So anyone could get rid of the toads just by singing Amazing Grace? It's not the song, honey. It's the singer. One of the nurses got to talking about what happened, and the story grew. Sure enough, some fool had to test it. Sissy Woodburn went into the swamp on a dare from her sorority sisters. They heard her start to sing Amazing Grace, but when the song turned to screams, they ran for their lives. Never found a trace of Sissy. How did Granny Maud know she had to sing? Came over her. Like a vision. she said. She could no sooner have stopped herself than she could have stopped a runaway train. Did she keep singing Amazing Grace to the toads? Yes, she did. She said the song had been given to her and it wasn't her place to change it. But when she taught my granny how to charm, she told her to be open to receiving her own song, and that's how it's been ever since. You sing Imagine all the time. Is that your toad charming song? I shrugged. That's what I was given. Good thing I like it. I'd been thrilled when I received that song. It was my favorite at the time, although sometimes I do wish I'd been given a backup. Patsy bounced in her chair. All the singing she'd heard from me and her mama now made sense. Was Mama's song I'll Stand By You? It was, but she didn't really like it. She kept trying new ones, but had to fall back on the one she'd been given. I hope I get Hello. I'll never get sick of it. She thought for a minute, then looked up at me with a solemn expression. But no one ever sees the toads. Are they even alive anymore? You'll see tonight. Tonight? Her big grin was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. A less special child would have been terrified, but Patsy was excited. Since Ellen died, I'd carried out the inherited duties by myself, but Ellen hadn't been as strong a charmer as me even before she got sick. Patsy reminded me of myself at her age. She would be a natural. That night, I strode into Big Cypress Swamp hand in hand with my granddaughter. She screamed in terror at her first sight of the knot, while I admired the undulating ocean of grays, greens, and browns, with the occasional flash of a red belly. When a toad touched her bare foot, her screaming changed to a single held note, D. Then the note rose to a G, and the beautiful sounds of Amazing Grace poured forth. I remained silent, with tears streaming, nearly breathless with pride. The knot turned its focus to Patsy as she completed her song. I'll never forget her look of complete elation. The flash of self-importance I also saw worried me, though. I'd felt the same when I first learned to charm, and it had led to an unspeakable act. I wish it had been Hello, she said as we walked out of the swamp. You should be proud to receive Amazing Grace. Granny Maud must be looking out for you. I swallowed hard to rid myself of the lump in my throat. Don't like hymns. She kicked at the dirt, then gave me a determined look. Granny, I want to practice, even if I don't like the song. Can we do this again tomorrow? After a month, I felt confident she could handle this as my partner. She insisted on going to the swamp every night, even when she was tired from school. I agreed, but only if she kept up with her homework. As I'd suspected, the toads responded to her like she was their mama. One night, while she was still singing, I broke into my charming song. A few toads hopped toward me, but most remained mesmerized by the strong voice coming from the small girl. I told her about Sheriff Gaynor. There'd been a Sheriff Gaynor in town since Maud and Ralph's time. The job seemed as much a legacy for the Gaynors as charming toads was for us. Sheriff Gaynor contacted us whenever there was a need for toad relocation, and thus kept both the incidents and the rumors to a minimum. The better Patsy got at charming toads, the more confidence she gained. She stopped coming home crying about the mean Wilkins sisters, and in fact, made friends with them. They were really nice girls when you got to know them, always called me ma'am. The sisters were fascinated with Patsy and mimicked her singing, filling the house with a chorus of sweet, girlish voices singing that great hymn. When she wanted to picnic near the swamp with her new best friends, I didn't object. Patsy had matured so since taking on the mantle of charmer. Besides, the toads didn't come out during the day, and she could keep them all safe. The girls always returned from their outings laughing and holding hands and seemed to have a wonderful time. Late this afternoon, the three girls went off to play as usual. Patsy returned alone and told me the sisters walked straight home since they were late for piano lessons. It was a great day, Granny. Best ever. With her face flushed pink and her pale blue eyes shining, she was the most beautiful little girl in the world. She skipped into the backyard to play with her new puppy. The older dog, Silas, had slipped his leash a couple weeks ago while Patsy was walking him near the swamp and had never come home. I was sure a gator had gotten him, and she'd been inconsolable until I brought Rufus home. The phone rang. "Mrs. Wilkins, how are you?" "No, the girls left here directly." My heart started racing as pieces fell into place. Silas had been old, and Patsy complained he was no fun anymore. I looked out the window to watch my granddaughter playing chase with Rufus like she hadn't a care in the world. Are you sure they didn't stop for ice cream?" "I see. I'll let you know if I hear anything." I hung up the phone and leaned against the wall, fighting a dizzy spell. Memories of Patsy's daddy flashed before me, his terrified eyes begging me to save him as a toad latched onto his tongue, cutting him off in mid-scream. After the toads covered him completely, I'd returned home to fix dinner for my daughter and granddaughter. I walked to the back door on shaky legs and stopped to steady my breathing. Pasting on a smile, I pushed open the screen and stepped onto the porch. "Patsy, honey, we need to talk." That was Amazing Patsy by Valerie B. Williams. If you're interested in more information about the author, you can find some links and info in the description here. Thank you for listening to the story and keeping me company today. Hope you'll be back next time.